Today's Locked On Cavs marks a new era, and it's just because I stuck around. And on today's show, I'll be discussing Cleveland Cavaliers president of basketball operations Koby Altman's somewhat surprising comments in his annual end of the season State of the Team Q&A session with members of the media.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On Cavs. How you doing? How you doing? Come on in and sit on down because Koby Altman said some pretty surprising things. Starting with the fact that, at least at the surface, no wholesale changes coming to the Cleveland Cavaliers. And to be frank, that is a little surprising, just considering the body was not even cold of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Their season had ended. They were, called dead by the priest. They read their last rites from the hospital bed, where they said that they, as in the Athletics, Shams Charania, Joe Varden, Jason Lloyd, and then Brian Windhorst from ESPN, and many others, myself included, kind of got the speculation and understanding that there was going to be some form of wholesale change coming to the Cleveland Cavaliers this offseason, with a lot of it hinging on Donovan Mitchell's decision, which we'll touch on later on in the show today, but more so the fact that there wasn't a lot of clarity or understanding on how this team moves forward with Evan Mobley and Jared Allen both being centers, and Mobley showcasing his chops as a center in those last 8 or so playoff games, depending on whenever Allen just kind of really started to slow down and lose steam in game 4 against Orlando, to now. And then obviously with Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell having so much overlap, and Garland's supposed trade demand being in the ether literally like not even moments after the body was cold for the Cavs, a lot of people thought wholesale change was coming, and Altman squashed that notion pretty quick. He did cite net rating, which is a kind of a skewed and sometimes flawed metric to kind of fully evaluate a team's ability or legitimacy on the court, but I mean there is some validity, I guess, to it if you want to look through it from that lens of just like the pairing of Garland and Mitchell or as a duo, or when one is on the floor and one isn't, and also with Mobley and Allen, and then the 4 together as well. But I think in Altman's eyes, the argument makes sense when you look at it through the lens of the Cavs did not have Evan Mobley and Darius Garland from mid-December till about January or February, depending on just like in terms of just being back, quote unquote, of this season. And the Cavs kept clicking and humming, and of course found their idealized play style of playing with one guard, one big, a lot of shooting, pace, space, etc., etc. And maybe that's more of a head coaching thing, which we'll talk about again soon, and because he had some interesting comments about that as well, and just the decision to let go of Bickerstaff, but more so the fact that the Cavs had the luxury of depth at the top end, because without Garland and Mobley, the Cavs kept humming and clicking with Allen and Mitchell on the floor, and inversely, like you look at the playoffs when Jared Allen went down, Evan Mobley was able to step up and kind of just keep the machine humming. And I think that just, in my eyes at least, compounds and confirms the argument that Mobley is better suited as a center long term. And I think it's just kind of tricky to have 2 centers on the floor, and you can't really bring Allen off the bench, because for a team like Cleveland that's looking to compete for championships, possibly $20 million devoted to a bench big is a great and gross mismanagement of assets. And so we shall see. Altman kind of made it clear that like the Cavs have built something special. He used examples of how like the Denver Nuggets took almost a decade to become a championship caliber team. It took the Milwaukee Bucks, between the duo of and the foundational piece of Chris Middleton and Giannis Antetokounmpo, it took them 5, 6, 7 years to become like a championship contender and win their first title. And yeah, there's a legitimate argument there. And at least in Altman's eyes, the Cavs are only in year 2 of this situation. And it would be a disservice to what he's built. And again, I don't think anybody's in terms of just like if you run a basketball team or if you're trying to like talk about the current situation of what maybe you were directly involved with, you're not going to go out there and say, yeah, this sucks. Like, well, man, I built some garbage out here. I got to clean this up and tear it down. No, you want to be as positive as possible despite, the disappointing end to the season or the change at head coach or anything like that. And I think I understand Altman's comments at that level. I disagree with them. And if that's the course of action the Cavs do, it'll be interesting to see how they play heading into next season if they have all four of these guys back, especially if Garland does demand a trade, which we'll touch on in a second. I'll read Rich Paul's comments about it because they were interesting because Chris Haynes from Bleacher Report was asked about this. But for me, and I think this is the most important thing, and for Altman's sake, you don't want to really be at a position of like disadvantage or whatever. And let me read Rich Paul's comment before I kind of elaborate on this. So Paul, CEO of Clutch Sports and also Darius Garland's direct representative in terms of just an agent, was asked by Chris Haynes about like the supposed demands, and Paul said this: "There's not much to say. I think people have their own opinions of what works and what doesn't work, and for me, I think people around the league know, and you definitely know this about me. I'm very matter of fact with my approach on everything. If there is something to be discussed, I would discuss it. As of now, there's nothing to discuss on that. My job is to evaluate every situation for every guy that we as a company represent. I'm a representative of players and I must help advise them on business decisions. It's a lot more to that than negotiating a contract for 4 years. Some guys choose to do that and only focus on that. I'm different. I try to look at everything. You'll try," and he talks about the draft for a second. And so these guys have to make sure they understand that having the talent they have in the production allows them to maintain value. That value transitions into compensation. And when you sum it all up, it's really just a good ass job. And sometimes you have to protect that for as long as you can. That's where my mindset is for all the guys, no matter if they're a max player or a minimum guy. My job is to prepare, educate, and execute for my clients. And Rich Paul, best in the business for a reason. He is one of the NBA's best overall, just representative to have, I'd say. In terms of just having an agent, but like it's pretty transparent. Like I think Garland will request a trade because from what I've gathered and heard, he's just like frustrated sharing the court with Mitchell because it doesn't maximize his chances on the floor. And also he was touted as the franchise guy until the Cavs traded for Donovan Mitchell. And I think maybe there could be some hurt feelings there. Maybe that could be fixed, but also it might be for the best if Garland goes to like San Antonio or Minnesota or Brooklyn or somewhere just to get like a mental reset on top of the physical reset that Altman and Cleveland's coaching staff kind of stressed to him in their one-on-one exit interviews. But I think at least like Altman putting this stuff out there too does help because like if a public trade demand comes down from Clutch Sports to the Cavs saying like, hey, Darius wants out because Donovan agreed to an extension, the Cavs are going to be at a bit of a position of disadvantage in terms of negotiations because it's going to come out to the ether, like the Wojs, the Shams, the Dammarells. Let's put all the people on Mount Rushmore here. We'll talk about the fact that like it's a public trade demand. Teams will know that going into it, but the Cavs make it pretty clear from the beginning. One, like, hey, we won't trade this guy. No, not at all. It makes it easier to get a better possible return if you're Cleveland because you're hedging your bets a little bit because in the event like Garland demands a trade, it's the Cavs who say like, well, we're not looking to trade him, but it'd be a disservice not to entertain conversations, I guess, now that it's kind of publicly known he wants out. And it gets the Cavs a little bit of a better return in terms of maybe some of the more middling discussions the previous era of Locked On Cavs discussed. And so that's a way to look at it too. And also, and this is maybe being a little bit cynical on my part, it's a good way to save face if you're the Cavs too, because let's say they do trade Garland. Now the Cavs can just say, well, Darius is the one who asked for a trade. We didn't want to trade him. And again, that's the cynic in me talking a little bit. That could 100% not be the case. Maybe the Cavs are looking at it from every angle and they are trying to bring all four of these guys back. But it will be an interesting thing to watch as things go on, because I did find it kind of interesting that Altman didn't make it really clear and push back on the idea that The Cavs don't really need to make any wholesale changes. They need to on their roster at least. But they need to work on the margins and they need to kind of figure out what they do and don't have with this team. I think they did figure some of that out just with the whole depth situation in terms of like Sam Merrill and Craig Porter Jr., two guys that Altman did shout out during his end of season media availability. And yeah, we will see. But there is one big change coming, and that is at the head coaching position, which Koby Altman had a lot to say about. But I actually have a lot to say about today's first sponsor, eBay Motors. So let's hear from them. As I had mentioned just seconds ago, today's episode of Locked On Cavs is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning a championship, also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain and level your vehicle up to peak performance. They have superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. And whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you want. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the needed parts at your desired prices, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge dubs. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to customers based in the United States of America. What is up, everyone? We are back with more Locked On Cavs, your number one podcast covering all things Cleveland Cavaliers. And while we're getting you your fill in on just me, because it's only me now, welcome to the Evan Dammarell era. I gotta ask, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Do you have to turn down all that shouting from Skip Bayless showing off his shoes? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that is programmed for all your everyday to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news. Streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, including Locked On Cavs, which features your team every day. So, while Koby Altman did say that no wholesale change is coming to the roster, and they're going to work within the margins, which means they'll probably use all of, or at least a good portion of, the $13.1 million mid-level exception they have, or the 20th overall pick in the NBA draft, where I think at least they should take a junior, a senior that can be an immediate impact player to kind of round out their rotation in terms of just depth and shooting. Not a guy that needs to play immediately, but a guy that can contribute if you call on his number versus a rookie you're going to stash in the G League for God knows how long, and maybe Luke Travis and Khalifa Diop come over too. It could be an interesting Cleveland Cavaliers, but just looking at the head coaching position, Koby Altman opened by saying that he wanted to thank JB Bickerstaff for everything he had done to get the Cavs to this point, because Altman did kind of make it clear, and it staggered me for a moment, but this is the first time in half a decade the Cleveland Cavaliers are conducting a head coaching search, because they parted ways with JB Bickerstaff, as everyone knows at this point. And I think that makes it tough. Altman called it a very difficult decision because professionally and personally, he's very close to Bickerstaff. JB's father, Bernie, is one of Kobe's top advisors, and I think that, makes it tough. And also, when you have a guy that was a big part of what you were trying to build all throughout this process, and he kind of puts this team up to the position they're at, him as in Bickerstaff, it does make it tough. But also, Altman did make it clear that the Cavs do need a fresh set of eyes. They need a new voice. They think, when he looks at this team, and something that he kind of reiterated on several occasions, is this Cavs team can't afford to become complacent just because the Celtics are young and they're not getting any older anytime soon. Jason Tatum's only like 19, I think, because of the Benjamin Button effect. They have to kind of find ways to remain competitive and not complacent in the East, especially if they want to level up and be able to hang with Boston, become a team that can either push the Celtics out of the playoffs. I mean, Milwaukee too, even though they're ancient in terms of age, or I mean, the Pacers are going to be really annoying and scrappy. The Magic are going to get better. The Knicks are going to get better. I think just the Eastern Conference is kind of not in a windfall, but they're leveling up all around, and the Cavs need to kind of maybe just take full perspective of things. And it's something the players reiterated as well. Like Max Strus was actually the first player, according to Altman, to say like the Cavs cannot afford to be complacent. Like they have a good team. And they have the ability to really become like a serious threat in the Eastern Conference, and the Cavs just cannot afford to be complacent and just rest on the laurels of regular season success and get bounced in the second round every single year. Like you don't want to be the Mike Budenholzer Atlanta Hawks or the second LeBron era Toronto Raptors, pre Kawhi Leonard Toronto Raptors, where LeBron James just kicked your teeth in every single time you met in the postseason. You don't want to be a team like that where you're really successful in the regular season and just flame out in the second round. And I think that's just going to kind of be part of the Cavs' approach when it looks at this next head coach. Because a lot of the players did like tell Altman in their exit interviews individually that the Cavs, at least the players, believe that they have the ability to build like a legitimate title threat, like a legitimate contender. They think they have something here. They think they're close. I think health did play a factor in their eyes against Boston, but it's more so the fact that the Cavs just firmly believe that they do have something special and they can build like a legitimate championship level team. And I think that does require a new head coach, a new voice, a new perspective, maybe a guy who, if Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland are both here next season, can figure out a way to unlock both of them and maximize their potential on the floor. If Jared Allen and Evan Mobley are both here next season, to maximize that duo and put them on the floor. If all four are back next season, to maximize those opportunities and just how to do everything on the floor. And I think, again, the free agency decisions will have a part in that. And also just the fact that the Cavs will just have to be competitive. But Altman wasn't really firm on who or what they're looking for. Like Kenny Atkinson was listed, James Borrego was listed. I'll be having guys on the show all throughout this week in the coming days as well, just to talk about their experience with Borrego or Atkinson and kind of give some insight on possible candidates. But Altman said like they don't have a list yet. They haven't really put anything to paper yet. They are going to take this Memorial Day weekend and then reconvene on Tuesday, just because, one, out of respect to Bickerstaff and kind of what he built with this team, and also kind of like to cleanse themselves of the emotional hangover that came with making a very hard franchise-altering decision. But they'll reconvene on Tuesday, and I think somewhat encouragingly, because, when you hear Dan Gilbert is involved in the process, it gives some fans some agita, just because Dan can sometimes do the outside of the box thinking. Like we all know, his white whale still is to have a college coach this team, probably Tom Izzo, but he's offered John Calipari and Mike Krzyzewski more money than God to coach this team before too, and they both politely declined. That's before the NIL came around, so maybe that changes the trajectory a little bit. But it's how you got John Beilein. At least part of it. The story is Mike Gansey's wedding, but whatever. But according to Haltman, Gilbert will be involved. He'll provide his input, but it'll be more so in the final stages of the coaching search. I think the Cavs, at least under Altman, this is what he said, like he and his staff will be doing the legwork, they'll be doing the interviews, they'll be doing the feeling out process, the kind of vetting and evaluating of coaching candidates. They'll compile a list of finalists and then present that list of finalists to Dan Gilbert, who will maybe interview the coaches during these final, or the coaching candidates during these final steps, or maybe they kind of look at what their options are when they get to that point. But Dan will be involved, but he'll be more of a final sign-off, which I think, as the owner of this and governor of this team, the guy who is one of the wealthiest men in America, who's pumped a lot of cash into making the Cavs like a championship-level organization, has earned that honor, but I don't think it's going to be as, like, dreary as some fans might fear it to be. But it'll be interesting to see just kind of how this whole process evolves and just kind of keeps moving. But a lot of it does hinge on the last really big domino in this entire offseason for Cleveland, and that's Donovan Mitchell, which Koby Altman had some interesting things to say about in terms of just like what Mitchell's future looks like with this team and how it will likely and will set the tone for this entire offseason for Cleveland. Surprise. No ad break. Got you, though. But during his one-on-one exit interviews, which for folks who are wondering if the players will speak, they won't. They've all gone home for the summer and the offseason to improve. But on the way out the door, Altman will sit down with each player individually. I think some of his staff are probably present for the conversations as well, just to like ask the players like, "Hey, what do you make of the season? What can we do to improve?" Just like speak to them all 1 through 18, technically speaking, just to kind of figure out like also just like if they're a free agent, like what is your general vibe? And one of those guys was Donovan Mitchell. Who had some pretty interesting comments. Although, like Altman was asked almost, I want to say immediately, "Hey, is Donovan Mitchell gonna have you? Do you have any updates?" And Altman, handled it well. Worked within the legal ramifications and guidelines, and said like, "No, we cannot have those conversations until July when the free agency period opens. But don't be surprised if Cleveland almost immediately, like as soon as the clock hits the proverbial midnight at the start of free agency, that Mitchell is offered that 4 year, 208.5, I think is the number off the top of my head, $1 million contract extension to stick with the Cavs." And Altman did give some reason for encouragement, though, to say, like, there were positive conversations because the way Altman painted the picture is Donovan Mitchell told Altman that he is excited. He is in Mitchell about the future of this Cavaliers team. He is excited about the prospects of this Cavaliers team. He believes they are. And he's one of the guys who said, like, they have something special here that could become a championship contender. Now, granted, he didn't say that Altman didn't say that, like Mitchell said, "Oh, yeah, and I'll be here as part of it, too." But, like, the way Mitchell painted the picture made it seem like he's very committed to what the Cavs are building and wants to be involved in the process because Altman was asked soon after, like, will Donovan be involved in the coaching search? Will he be involved in free agency decisions? And Kobe kind of spun it more positively to make it seem like Mitchell's not like the guy running the show, which he isn't. He's not the president of basketball operations. Koby Altman is, but more so the fact that Mitchell will provide input because Altman shared the example of last season. Mitchell was the guy who recruited Max Strus to Cleveland. He is the guy who helped bring George Niang here. He's the guy who helped bring Ty Jerome here too. The Cavs, of course, had to close the deal and really sell the upside of playing for the Cavs under Bickerstaff at the time. But like Mitchell probably had to give some assurances to these guys too to like really make it worth their while too. So Altman made it clear that like yeah they'll be running free agency decisions by him. I think Mitchell will be a guy who's kind of recruiting free agents and helping the Cavs find options to work within that mid-level exception that accentuate Mitchell's talents and what the Cavs have built presently and just continue to build upon that. And Mitchell did it last season without an extension. You'd assume he's going to be in the same vein and probably re-up on that extension before he does it because I think if he's a believer in what the Cavs are building, that gives you a reason for optimism on what they are trying to do and what they're trying to form as this season just kind of keeps evolving and growing. And it's an interesting time for sure. Like you can't like firmly say like, "Oh yeah, we know what Donovan Mitchell's doing." No one knows what Donovan Mitchell's doing other than Donovan Mitchell, but it's encouraging, at least to me in my eyes. And I got the sense that like if Mitchell's going to be involved in the free agency process, if he's going to be giving his opinion on the head coaching hires because he has input on it too, the Cavs are treating him like the franchise player that he is. They're giving him the respect that he wants in terms of just like building this team and making them like a legitimate title threat and contender. And if he's already married or somewhat married, not like fully divorced to the idea of what the Cavs are doing right now, I think that gives you reason to be optimistic and reason for encouragement to say, okay, Donovan Mitchell is definitely warming up to the idea of the Cavs being where he plays the better part of his prime and everything else. And we shall see what the next steps are, but I feel comfortable in saying that Mitchell is going to re-up with the Cavs in some capacity. Maybe it's not a full 4 year max. Maybe it's something that has a little bit more of an avenue to allow him to exit to free agency earlier if he wants to. But also, this money is monopoly money. These guys are all multimillionaires, and these owners are multi-billionaires at this point too. It's easier for players to move on when they want out as well. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I think now that the Bickerstaff domino has fallen, and we know the Cavs looking at a new head coach, Altman said ideally they'd have him as the coach in place before this June's NBA draft, but that's kind of an unrealistic timeline. The Cavs will be patient and pragmatic in terms of evaluating every best candidate because they want to find a guy who can maximize this roster. And I think Donovan Mitchell will be a guy who gives a lot of input on that too. But we shall see what the next steps are for the Cavs. It's kind of an interesting time, but I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about their futures in terms of just keeping Donovan Mitchell. Maybe they don't break up the entire foursome of Mobley, Mitchell, Garland, and Allen, and you only see one of those guys go, and maybe the Cavs also just kind of put themselves in a nice position where they aren't scrambling to find a possible return for guys who either won out or guys who maybe hurt their value a little bit by putting a little bit of a trade demand out there in the ether. But we shall see. But for this week, we'll be talking with Cuddly Teddy Bear and having a TikTok intervention with Mac Robinson to talk about the state of the Cavs and probably more on Altman's comments that I didn't address today. More so on some of the coaching front stuff. Although Altman said there isn't a list out there, there'll be some conversation with Chuck Mockler from former Locked On Clippers host to talk about Kenny Atkinson. I'll be talking to Adam Armbrecht from Locked On Nets to talk about Kenny Atkinson when he coached the Nets. I'll be talking with Doug Branson and from Locked On Hornets and the guys from Locked On Pelicans to talk about James Borrego and his head coaching time with Charlotte, and also just like what he's done offensively for the Pelicans this year to kind of give a perspective on that. And we'll just be kind of keeping our finger on the pulse as this is the new era of Locked On Cavs, where I didn't abandon you. I'm still here. I'll still be doing this show. And yeah, check me out and write down Euclid if you want as well. And I'll be back tomorrow with more on the Cleveland Cavaliers. But enjoy your Memorial Day, everyone. Have fun, stay safe, wear some sunscreen. And if you want to stay inside while you're staying cool, just want to remind you that everyone and everywhere that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's called Locked On Sports Today, and it's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus their national shows covering every league. Just go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Again, folks, I'm Evan Dammarell. It's just me now. I do all the audio, video, and talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers, but I'll be joined by a boatload of guests this week and over the coming weeks to talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers and preview their ongoing offseason and talk about any moves that may come.